Welcome everybody back here at Veil of Sound, the final interview of 2024. Last but one to go in our interview marathon. We will end this marathon as usually on January 1st, but first, last day, you want to go out with some good pushing music that might move your feet for your New Year's Eve parties. So we thought, let's give you not only food for feet, but also food for thought. I'm very, very happy to have Egan. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Egan from Respire here on the show. So thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Did I pronounce that first name correctly?
Yeah, no, that's totally fine.
So how would mom and dad call you?
Well, I'm Albanian, so
I know.
yes,
So
it would at home. It's Egin at home, but
okay.
That's a little weird for most people. So people here call me Egin or Egan. I'm not picky.
Okay, so Egan. So first of all, we should clarify what you are doing in Respire. You're one of the many vocalists, and you play the synths, right?
And guitar, yeah. So I am one of the two main vocalists, along with my bandmate Rohan, and one of three guitar players. Yeah.
And we always ask that here, and it's very easy that to see. But what kind of band merch would you plug today? I will plug something. Some of the best
Nice.
Canadian music ever, Ken Mode. And if anybody
Yes.
recognizes the shirt, it should be loved.
Yes, they're good pals of ours. We played recently this year. We played a show with them, and they're great. Wild, weird band for
Yes.
sure. And I'm wearing Alpinist from your country.
Yes. I didn't want to say it, but as if we had thought about it. Yeah.
Yes.
One of those bands that, unfortunately, as far as I know, are not with us anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Should have produced more music and should have gotten more attention.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Again, where are we catching you? Right straight in Toronto or?
Yep. This is my chaotic apartment in Toronto, Canada.
Chaotic. I don't see anything chaotic, but that's cool.
There's things going on behind me, but I'm hiding it with my body.
Again, the reason or one of the reasons for this interview is, of course, the last record that you put out this summer. I always forget how to pronounce that name. Hiriev.
Yeah.
I looked up what it means, and according to the dictionary, Hiriev is a Welsh word, and it's about the feeling of longing connected with sadness and loss. So what is Respire longing that has been lost?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think in the records context and in how we was, the sense of when you're a foreigner, your kind of concept in relation to an idea of home is pretty complicated. So I've been in Canada now for 20 some years. But before then, I grew up in Japan as a child, and so my tie back to my Albanian heritage is tenuous and pretty complicated. And so there's this, I think, general feeling that myself and Rohan, also as an Indian immigrant, have, which is a desire to feel like you belong somewhere and feel like you have a home. And when you return back to where you come from, that's obviously not necessarily a place that you have, that sort of innate connection with. So whatever you're longing for as an idea of, return or where you are currently feels kind of like you're longing for something that might not necessarily exist, either whether it's anymore or whether if it really existed ever, if it's just kind of your conception of, what this home might be. You're sort of chasing something ephemeral and also non-existent anymore. So So yeah, we were writing a record about our experiences as immigrants, living in this sort of state of affairs where immigrants are scapegoated and blamed for the ills of the world. And we wanted to try to, kind of place a more narrative emphasis on what it feels like to have the world kind of, tell you that you don't belong here. And then while at the same time, you don't feel that you belong where you've originally come from as well. And this sort of placelessness and home, lack of home that is kind of underrooting that experience. And yeah, just trying to come to terms with what it means to be a migrant in the 21st century. Obviously, anti-immigrant sentiments have existed for a long time, but they've definitely taken a bit of an upswing in the last few years, in the last year, especially here in North America. So we thought it was an important sort of story to try to discuss. How well we did on discussing that is obviously up for interpretation, but yeah, it's a big thing to discuss. And I'm not 100% sure if we did it justice or not, but it was something that we felt was worth trying to talk about.
Definitely a problem of our times on the one hand. On the other hand, xenophobia has existed ever since people started moving from one place to the other. I think in the connection of you as a band, before we come to you as a Canadian band, for you as a band, you've already mentioned, Rohan having some kind of non-Canadian background. But of course, when you look at other bandmates' names like Trevi Dupois or Emmett O'Reilly, those are also not native Canadian names. How do they feel about that problem? I mean, I don't know how long their families have been in Canada, but do they also see that same problem?
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily want to speak for them and their experiences, but I mean, you are right. Canada is a pluralistic place, right? I mean, Travis's family, the Dupuis, are French Canadian, and that identity exists independently while at the same time ingratiated into the Canadian identity. And I think that's generally been in my 20-something years, and I think Rohan feels the same. That was always kind of our point of pride in Canada, is that this is a very admittedly and proudly pluralistic place, where the doors have been open to immigrants to be able to make an identity that is both at the same time Canadian and also of the identity where they're from. Now, at the same time, I mean, I don't know how prevalent this was 20 years ago, but these days it feels like nationhood and nationalism in Canada has really started to, be seen more and more prevalently. And it's been shifted, but I mean, you are right. Like Emmett obviously has a Scottish-Irish background. Darren Scarfo is an Italian-Canadian background, few generations removed as an immigrant. And it's silly, how easily and how quickly that identity just gets kind of erased. I mean, not with my bandmates, but with every other Canadian that's here a couple generations removed from my perspective or Rohan's experience. But this is what we see, I mean, something that we try to discuss, through symbols or metaphors as well on the record was that the fact that there's a lot of first generation immigrants that are against immigrants in Canada, whether it be Albanians or Indian immigrants, that literally came here, whether they did as children or as adults, or their parents did as adults, who have this us against them mentality, or this idea of like, well, not those kinds of immigrants, but we're fine, or and you move the goalposts. I mean, in America right now, what we're seeing is this notion of criminal illegal immigrant as opposed to illegal immigrants, where at the same time you have politicians saying that, well, you just being here illegally is a crime, so
Yeah.
It's like where are these lines drawn, and how are people okay to just draw these arbitrary lines that exclude them in their own minds? Um, yeah, it's a weird thing for sure. I mean, this is the new world after all, right? I mean, everybody here is a foreigner.
Yeah, and that is something that you've already hinted at it. I mean, like, Canada has always seemed like the cooler and somewhat more integrated little brother of the Americas. But the way that you describe it, it seems as if you are witnessing a rise in nationalism and xenophobia. Would you subscribe to that?
I do think so. Yes, I mean, I think Canada's a very unfortunate country in the sense that what happens in America has direct repercussions here.
Yeah.
It's almost an echo. When we were in the Bush years, the W. Bush years, we had Stephen Harper, who was a very much similar sort of neoconservative. And then after Obama, we had Trudeau for the last 10 or so years. And, as a result of stagnation, the COVID pandemic, everything, and obviously Trump and MAGA politics, we've generally seen a kind of a shifting of the ideological lines, I think, in Canada, and the new right wing here is much more populist, much more reactionary, and much more kind of devoid, really, in my opinion, of much in the way of solutions to these problems, as much as just bringing the problems up incessantly to try to drive a wedge between Canadians. And so we had a couple of years ago during COVID, we had the trucker protests. I don't know
Yeah,
if you
yeah, of
ever
course.
heard about it in Ottawa, and it's been a pretty steady line, as it has been I think in most developed countries. From COVID, there's been this real sort of I don't know how you want to call it, but just anger and resentment at who they think are the enemies of the people,
Yeah.
and it's just people being led by rhetoric and propaganda to hate the wrong people, whether it be liberals or immigrants or whoever else. So yeah, I think we have an election coming up next year in Canada. I expect the Conservatives will win. In my opinion, it's do they have a majority government? Do they have a minority government? That's pretty much where we're playing at the moment. But Canadians are very dissatisfied, and it doesn't help that economically this country is also struggling. So it's a tough time, and I don't necessarily feel too confident about the future of this country. But you know,
Do you then, by now, because we also have coming elections coming up in beginning of
yes,
2025 here in Germany, we will have early new elections over here. They should have been in the fall. Now they're beginning of year, and by now I know a lot of people who are thinking about voting strategically in order to prevent the
AFD.
brown
Yeah.
neo-Nazi scum from taking over. Do you have similar thoughts about voting next year as well? Voting for the
Canada,
lesser of two
uh,
evils?
Canada's a tricky place, and it's probably a lot more close to the European Germany experience in parliamentary democracy than it is in America, where there's just two parties in America, and there's really just A, option B. In Canada as well, we have I don't know, 5 to 7 parties vying for the national in a national election for parliamentary seats. And the problem in Canada is that we have one Conservative party and we have 3, 4 Liberal parties. So strategic voting has always been a reality in Canada because of that fact. I've always voted based on the riding that I live in and who has the best chance of defeating Conservatives in the riding that I
Yeah,
live in.
yeah,
And that often means that I don't vote for exactly the party that aligns with my political ideals because I don't think they can win. So it's unfortunate, and I do feel for that pain, and I also don't really know what the best solution is. I think
yeah. That's
I'm a believer in parliamentary democracy in the way that we have it in Europe and in Canada. but at the same time, it is ineffectual, and it does come into problems, especially dealing with radical forces and populist forces. I mean, we have tons of history all across the board of these sorts of, bad faith players getting in on really minority governments that are touted as the will of the people. So yeah, I don't envy either of us. Next year is going to
No,
be it's yeah.
yeah. Um, do you think that the new upcoming legislature of the orangutan, I do not call him president for fuck's sake, do you think that that will also have consequences on the music scene in the US? Or let's say, will it have consequences on your band, for example, touring the states?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's really weird because we've been a band now for 11 or so years, and we had never been to America as a band in all that time, and our first American shows ended up being like a week after Trump got elected, which was unexpected. The first go around, I expected that he was going to win. It seemed hard to believe, but it seemed like the way that things were going. This time around, I personally really, it was surprising and not surprising at the same time.
Yeah, yeah,
And I, as a European living in North America, I still have not really seen too much of North America, and especially America. So there's a lot that I don't really understand, and I think when you're really driving through the country, you start to see how broken of a place it really is socially, infrastructure wise, politically, and yeah, I mean we have more plans next year to go through the states, and it'll be interesting as and it's a shame. I mean, of course, the people that we know in America are wonderful people, and they have great politics, and stand for what we stand for. Living in this country that seemingly does not, in the case of our friends who are trans, doesn't even want to recognize their lives, doesn't want to recognize their rights.
yeah.
So it's done. It's a difficult time now. As far as like music and punk rock goes, I mean, I think what we offer, right, is alternative communities. And it's the same in Toronto with New Friends and New Friends DIY and New Friends Fest, which Rohan and I run with others. I mean, Canada and Toronto is a very big society with, as I said, pluralistic. It has a lot of different enclaves of social community. And I think what we've done in 5-7 years is to create an alternative community.
Yeah.
And I think we're very proud of the fact that New Friends Fest is full of trans kids and is all ages. So it really, our intent is to bring young people who may feel ostracized and show them that there are alternatives to just feeling isolated and alienated in the country or the city or the state where you are in. So, I mean, that's my hope, sure, is that people continue to understand that, there is kind of the grassroots mobilization or at least the notion of not feeling so alone. So I do think that there's probably going to be more of that, but at the same time, America is such a commercialized place. And I think the way that digital media exists these days, doesn't really is less geared towards kind of underground subcultures. So I'm not really sure. I have hopes, that maybe when things are so devoid of values, that people gravitate towards communities that have values and that are value first. We'll see. I mean, I think I look back to like the last 4 years of Trump, and I'm not really sure what that did in America as far as underground subcultures and value-driven sort of subcultures. So that's why I'm a little hesitant. I don't know. And I think that's part of the mystery of America. You know, it's hard to understand how there can be not more kind of resistance or grassroots movements. And I do think the second time of a victory or a loss in our sense feels much more demoralizing when they win
Yeah,
the second time. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I don't know right now where everybody's in kind of a mourning period. I think people are still trying to make sense of all this. I do hope that there is more of a push towards collective, people making collective voices and making those voices heard. We'll see.
Would you say that the idea that you just mentioned of, building enclaves, offering help to those feeling ostracized, would you say that that is the most important element of what punk rock in the 21st century can still do?
I do think it. I mean, for me, that's why I'm still here, right? I mean, I think I've been playing music longer than I've been involved in a DIY punk world.
Mm.
Um, but what really stuck me here as a young, 18, 19-year old was the community aspect, and was the fact that, it really is a judgmentless place for freaks and for people that want to be different. And I think there's great value in that, instead of just kind of, ostracizing these people because they don't fit into whatever is kind of societal, idea of like, this is what you must be to be successful, or you must look like to be a upstanding member or a business leader or whatever it might be. That like you give people some sort of a ladder behind you, to not only feel accepted, but to be involved and to be able to create something that is bigger than themselves, that others can then, look to, emulate, continue to grow that little enclave community. So yeah, I mean, personally, it's always been more about the values, the community, the ideas. I think that ties us all together
Mm.
in the underground, right? Like we might not all share the same kind of music, and I think Respire is a little bit of an outlier band, anyways, as far as the sound is concerned. So I think I always looked to like Godspeed You Black Emperor when I was growing up, because they consider themselves punk,
Yeah.
as anarchists and all these things, without really ever sounding like a punk band. And so I always kind of look to that as my, this is an idea, it's an expression, and it's not necessarily about the music, but what the music embodies, signifies, and then the culture and the discourse around it, I think is my favorite part.
Um, you've already hinted at your band being some kind of outlier. One could say outlier. One could also say highly adaptable, because you can fit into, I don't want to say all kind of settings and lineups, but in very, very many ones. I mean, like, of course, it probably has never been a deliberate decision to sound the way you sound. It probably is like the result of an organic process, I would venture to guess. Um, However, have you ever felt that this highly multi applicability, we can play with black metal bands, we can play with hardcore bands, we can play with post rock bands. Do you consider that a plus for Respire, or somewhat of a negative thing?
Uh, I think it's both, to be honest. I think um, when we started the band 11 years ago, I think our idea was always to make something big, and and to utilize classical instruments in hardcore, and sort of just like we love all these different kinds of music and all these different kinds of sounds, and being in a very big band, as in like 7 people, we all bring individual. It was always an idea of like, let's not draw a line here or box ourselves in, and try to implement all these things. And at the beginning, I think we thought that it would be a good thing, that it would open more doors for us. And in one regard, it has. We have played with everybody from like Pelican to like hardcore bands and screamo bands and black metal bands, and like you said, that is true. But at the same time, I think people like labels. I think they like gravitate towards things they can understand and categorize. So do I think that at some point maybe we weird some people out a little, or maybe it's like there's so much happening that they're like, oh, that's really cool, but I'd rather listen to XYZ that's a little more straightforward. I don't know. Would I be surprised to find out that that's the case? Not really. I think at the end of the day, we just don't really care. I think after 4 records of being an underground band that has varying degrees of success and big, small shows alike, personally, anyways, it's just about doing what we want to do, pushing ourselves creatively to not do the same thing twice, and just do it with our friends, and yeah, like I think it was kind of a purposeful thing at the very beginning, but as we've written more music, it has become much more organic. The last 2 records, especially, I think, came to be the way that they were. Hearath, especially, that's just the way it came to be. It sounds a little softer, maybe, but that's where we were all at, and yeah.
You've already mentioned, like pushing yourself. If I remember correctly, this is the first time that you had 3 or 4 years between 2 full lengths. So I think the last record, Black Line, didn't take as long as this one took. Does that also have to do with this? Okay, we want to push ourselves. We don't want to say something and do something twice, or is it also just simply a result of COVID?
It's mostly, to be honest, a result of the fact that Rohan doesn't live in Canada anymore. Rohan is now a Texan. He lives in Austin, Texas, and is now a dual citizen. So he moved in 2020, 2021, right around the time, right after when Black Line came out, and obviously also in the thick of COVID. So I think those few things, and there was also a sense of like, I think it's both. Yeah. Like, of course, we have always, I think every record we've upped the ante as far as our production wise goes. I mean, for example, we've always scored out all of the guitar parts, because there's 3 guitar parts. And then on top of that, we have violins and trumpets and everything. It helps to have ledger of the notes that everybody's playing, so you're not doing things that are dissonant where you don't want them to be dissonant, and you do things that are dissonant where you want them to be dissonant.
Yeah.
But this time around, partly because we had never done it before, and also because Rohan is now international and we have to change the way that we do things, we scored out all the violins and all the trumpets and really tried to approach all of the voices as thoughtfully as we could, instead of, as before, we'd maybe do a little bit more improvisation or on the fly or writing in the studio. This time, because we were doing it in a more traditional studio, because we only had an X number of days to really get this thing done, because Rohan was flying in, I think we tried to make everything more purposeful, strip the guitars back if there's better things going on in the horns or the strings, and vice versa. So yeah, I think all of it kind of, led to it taking longer than before. Yeah.
By the way, you've mentioned all the vocal lines. What did Ben do to not deserve to be allowed to sing on the record?
Nothing. That's a
Yeah.
good
That's what you
question.
say now. You're a bass player. You
To be honest, I haven't even thought about it. Does he not have any vocals?
Well, at least he's not credited somewhere with vocals. So I figure.
I thought, yeah. Oh, damn. Have to retroactively. Yeah, you're right. He doesn't have any. He's not credited with vocals. Yeah. Oops. Next time, Ben's on there too.
Yeah. You've also mentioned the classical aspect of your music. So let's cut to the chase. Does any one of you have a classical musical background?
Yeah. Eslin and Emmett both studied music at the University of Toronto, which is where I met them, where I studied as well. Um, Eslin obviously did violin and did classical violin, and she still teaches music. She teaches violin. Whereas Emmett was in the jazz program, if I remember correctly, at U of T as a horn player. And both of them I met, like I said, through a mutual friend who studied music that I went to high school with at U of T. So yes, they are the real musicians of the group.
You make it sound so funny, but I mean, like we have two very very different musical worlds clashing in Respire, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
how do those two worlds correspond with each other? Can you say like, okay, first they come with an idea, or first the punk band comes with an idea, or how does the songwriting work in general? Let's put it like that.
So I think it's changed a little on this record. I mean, it used to always be the sort of guitars first.
May I venture to guess this one was one of the first times where they were already co-writing the stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the scoring system, they didn't really like on some of it they did it alone or at least together writing stuff, but there was a lot more kind of back and forth this time.
Mm-hmm.
So there are motifs and there are parts where I think we might have like been like, what if it was like this and then other parts where they were doing something and then we also examined it being like, okay, this is really, shines very well. What if we just got rid of that guitar part altogether? Or what if we just came back at it to the guitar sections and stripped it back a little, which I think was always what we wanted to do. It's just hard to write, six people's melodic parts all together and then go into the studio. So before we've kind of done it more off the cuff, like Rohan and I would be in the studio and Eslin would be there and she'd be playing and we'd be like, okay, what if we did this? But then all the guitars already laid down, like you're just trying to fit in. And this time, yeah, we definitely, I think, did it more collaboratively. And also they worked together this time. Whereas before they've been sort of Emmett and Eslin have been kind of, writing individually into the greater sort of pile of things. Yeah, I don't know. I think that was always the intention. It's just hard to do. And I think we did it. We definitely did it more than we've done it before on this record.
And I also think it's very audible. I think not to say that it has been chaotic before, that's not the way, but I think it has become more audible on Here AF because it sounds like a very, very cohesive effort by a collective. And that's also something that I would like to ask. I mean, like, over the couple of years that we here at Veil of Sound have been doing that, we have seen a very, very strong push to the extremes, either one or two people doing something or really bigger bands. I think we have had less of a classical 3 or 4 man formula. Is that something where you say like, okay, this is the future of music, or is it just something that works for you?
I think it's just something that works for us more. I mean, I think in the world that we live in today, probably just straight on numbers wise, as music is concerned, popular music is concerned, it's probably the reverse. I would think that more people are venturing out as solo artists or with backing tracks or in that sort of
Yeah.
regard, and it becomes maybe less common even to see like a 3-4 person band. For me and for us, it was like I fell in love with big bands as a young person, and
I
Canada
mean, you
was very
said
lucky.
Godspeed, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and like Canada in the 2000s was like a hotbed of big like bands. You had Broken Social Scene, and you had Stars and Arcade Fire, and all these bands with like 6+ people and
Yeah.
violins and all these things, and that's really I really fell in love with that. And then obviously Godspeed and this idea of collective art making was always something that I thought was very beautiful and that I wanted to aspire to. So the yeah, I mean, like, I don't know, it's kind of always how I've done things, to be honest. Like my very first band was also like 6 people. And then I had like a little brief period of like 3-4 people bands. And then it's been Respire, for 11 years. And I think that there's just something very hard to you can't really replicate watching 7 people play music together,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
being locked in, however tight or loose.
Yeah.
There's something very human and organic about that you really don't get, no matter how great the project is, when it's like a 2 piece or a 1 piece. The music might be great, but the sort of organic experience of it live is very different. And obviously I've never seen Respire live, but I would hope that it comes across as this sort of very organic, intimate experience with 7 people at the helm.
We have now scratched that collective idea a little bit, and we've mentioned like broken social scene. We've mentioned the Constellation collective idea in Montreal. Would you say that something like that is also developing around New Friends in Toronto, like collective of I don't know how many people working on multiple things together?
I think New Friends is definitely really coming into its own force as far as collective organization and ideology goes. I mean, we started with 3 people. One of those 3, Vanessa, is now no longer with New Friends. She's doing her own stuff, and we have 6 other people who have joined in, who are for the most part younger than Rohan and I, or haven't been around this specific scene as long as Rohan and I. And over the last 2 years, it's really shifted to the point where they are kind of they are the ones making the local New Friends stuff run. And even at the festival, they have a lot of responsibilities, and I mean, we wouldn't be able to do it without
Mhm.
the other people coming into the play. But it's more than just like hiring help, right? I mean, the idea is to give these people the keys. Rohan and I are both in our 30s, mid 30s, and as much as we'd love to do this forever,
And one of them isn't even in Toronto.
Exactly, one of them doesn't even live in Canada. So as much as we'd love to do this forever, there is a reality to be faced of the fact that things cannot last forever if it's just you, right? If it's tied to a person, and this was our experience in the Canadian DIY scene growing up, was that there were these amazing people that were doing incredible work, and Canada's the kind of place where if you don't book the bands, they're probably not going to come here. It's A, there's a border, B, it's a long drive to get here from America. And C, Americans are often have never even come to Canada. So they won't even know what the fuck's going on here, right? So we always notice the importance of promoters and the importance of people that are bringing, outsider art and underground music into a place like Toronto, which is really dominated by, kind of the Canadian indie scene or whatever it might be. And what we realized was that these people, they would quit or they would stop, and then there would just be immediate shrinking of our scene. People would find other avenues, or they would just leave music altogether. So, the idea was always to share the burden, as it were, and make the work, split between the three of us. And now the idea is to create some sort of a thing. It's a dream, right? I mean, I don't know if it's really going to work, but the goal is that, maybe in 5 years, neither of us are involved, and maybe there's still a New Friends Fest or still a New Friends DIY presence. That whether or not that happens, whether or not I actually leave entirely or all that is up in the air. But that that's the kind of world that I would like to create, is that, and our scene in Toronto right now is very different from the scene that existed when I was young. When I was young, it was mostly all older people. There were like maybe 5 or 6 of us that ended up being in Respire and in the other kind of screamo bands that have come through the city. But now it's tons of kids, tons of young people. And I think, in my opinion, the more you drive home this idea of a community, the more you try to communicate that this isn't just a show, that we aren't just promoters, these aren't just bands, that we're all friends doing this together, going out of our way, losing money, making money, whatever it might be. The hope is that, you inspire more than just an audience spectatorship, and that you can actually, just break down that line and say, listen, you like coming here, but how would you like to be involved? And what can you do? And how do you want to see
bring
this
to the table, right?
Yeah. And how do you want to see it grow and change, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be what I thought it was. I think that's the whole point of change and new generations. So, it's exciting and it's interesting. And I do think that our labor is bearing fruit in this regard, and that we are kind of starting on a path of something that's more collective run and owned, hopefully one day as well. I mean, I hope that they feel, that they also have a stake in this. But it's the larger group has only really been around for 2 years, whereas New Friends, and we've been doing this now for 7. So we'll see, but yeah.
Something that also struck me, I was just going through my notes, that I wanted to ask about the way you write songs. Sorry for stepping back there for a moment.
Okay. Yeah.
But you have, all of you are basically multi-instrumentalists, apart from Ben, who's only playing bass and is not allowed to sing. But all the others are multi-instrumentalists, and you have another person on there, and I hope I pronounce it correctly, Tokyo Spears, who's bringing 5 or 6 more instruments to the table. How much involvement did that person? I don't know it's male or female. That's why I say that person. How much of an influence did that person have on the songwriting, or was it putting the garnishing finishes on the top?
Yeah, with Tokyo. So Tokyo is it's a he. This actually isn't the first time he's been involved in a Respire record. He was also involved in Denouement. Wasn't involved in Blackline. Tokyo is just an extremely talented individual, songwriter, producer, who's actually maybe more invested in a pop country sort of part of music. Although, his personal backgrounds definitely stem from DIY and things like that. And I see him at shows every so often. But he's the kind of guy that we can give ideas and sort of what we were thinking, and then he'll come back with even better or even more. And then we're able to sort of, kind of structure it. So I think Tokyo's edition is definitely a little more closer oriented to the old way of Respire recording, where we'd have a bone and then people would come and add more sparkle to it, whether it be, and part of it is just like it's impossible to do it all ourselves. I mean, I think this record took like 11 full days at the studio just for all seven of us to record.
Mhm.
If we were also going to record piano, glockenspiel, and cellos, and all those other things ourselves, that's just even more time, even more
Yeah.
money. So, I think sadly there still does have to be a bit of a post-production writing process. That post-production, as in like the post-recording studio time. But all the people that do that, we've had pretty good relationships with in the past. So I think it's generally been the same kind of collective of people. Like Andrew recorded saxophone. I mean, Andrew did it at the studio that we were all doing it at, but Andrew's been on 3 Respire records now. So, really has an idea of our idea and sort of the sounds that we'd like to get. Without necessarily being able to like, yeah, it's not, or one of my cats. Yeah, it works well. And we definitely do see them as an extended family. That adds a very important and special part. I think, Blackline didn't really have room, I think, because it's a bit of a more aggressive record. But I feel Tokyo's absence on that album personally. And having him back in the fold for Hear Eighth was really nice because you remember that those kinds of the Tokyoisms and the ability that he's able to bring in his piano and everything else that we frankly don't have. So yeah.
Yeah, he basically brings you closer to Godspeed,
Mm-hmm.
right? With a lot of the singular elements that he brings to the table. Yes, of course. I have one last thing before we come to the infamous quickfire round at the end, and that is you had your record mixed and mastered by Jack Shirley. I mean, like one of the household names in alternative music for, shall we say, 30, nearly 40 years now.
Mm-hmm.
How was working with Jack? Did you just send him the stuff? Did he finish it? Was it a job, or was there more interaction?
There was definitely quite a bit of interaction. Yeah, I mean, Respire is it's not a straightforward band, like. So yeah, like Jack had mastered our last 2 records before. So we'd had a bit of a back and forth previously with Jack in a mastering sense. And, it's a question every time you make a record, right? You're like, who's going to do the mixing, the mastering is a big part of it. So we floated some names around and really just, settled on Jack out of
Yeah, Rick Rubin didn't
obviously
have time, I guess.
But of course, Jack is fantastic, and we worked with Jack before, and we love the records that Jack has made. So we went with Jack, and interestingly, I mean, Jack is a beast and is able to do a lot real fast. But at the same time, I think even for Jack, and again, I don't want to speak for him, but I think mixing a Respire record, especially Hear Eighth, which was maybe more grandiose even than Blackline, comes with its own challenges and its own confusing questions and things like that. So there was definitely quite a bit of back and forth. I think I can't remember if we did any sort of remote sessions. We might have, sort of on Zoom or what have you. And it's always funny, right? Because again, we're not, we don't have the production sort of language comfortably at hand, right? So a lot of the times, and because there's so many of us, there is always like too many cooks in the kitchen sort of problem that you have to sort of face, right? It's like, are we really aligned? And on top of that, how do we communicate the ideas that we have? So yeah, it took a long time. It took longer, definitely, than we expected and that Jack expected. It ended up being more expensive as a result, obviously. But yeah, I mean, Jack is fantastic. Honestly, like I have no bad things to say about Jack. He really does have the he has a great ear for obviously the music, the instruments, the recording process, the tones. I think Jack brought a lot of questions in the mixing stage to us that we will now take onto our next projects and our next recording sessions, and try to divert maybe a little bit more attention to things like guitar tones and amps, and which is great, which is what we want really from a partner. And yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I think if I remember correctly, Jack had recently worked on orchestra of some kind, or something that had quite a lot of voices involved, and it definitely helped to. And yeah, honestly, actually, something else that's interesting to mention is that even before we went into the studio, we talked to Jack and had a bit of a brainstorming around how to organize some of the sounds. For example, the guitars. Because we have 3 guitars, right? It's a little bit of an awkward number. Usually, if you have 2 guitars, you can like pan them right and left.
Yeah.
But when you have 3 guitars and nobody's ever just the rhythm guitarist, everybody's kind of switching roles. We wanted to talk to Jack and see like how we should better organize that. And so this time around, we kind of, we removed the person from the guitar part, as it were, and we did 4 guitars. With like more of the leads on the pans, and then more of the bass in the middle. And then what that would mean is like we would just make a guitar tone for guitar 1, and then depending on who has that guitar 1 part, whether it be me or Darren or Rohan, we'd be playing through that amp. And then for guitar 2, we'd all be playing through that amp for the parts that we have that are like that. So things like that where, I mean, we would have never thought of that really. And it was something that Jack said would make things stronger. And again, once we got into the mix stage and once he had all the parts, then he, also had further comments about like, well, if you did it this way, this would probably sound more like you wanted it to sound. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Right. And I think that's like the benefit of having a real producer in the fold when you're making music is like, yeah, I mean, you can't do it all. Like you can't, and especially when it comes to production, it's so technical. And when you make grandiose music, you really have to think about like, where are we making the space for, how are we fucking making even more space? And and it's we're not, it's every time we do this, we learn more and get better ideas about how to streamline and make things, not only from like a work perspective, how to like get them done better, but also how to make it sound better, how to make the human ear be able to fucking hear all these things going on at the same time. Which is part of the fun, I think, of Respire, really. It's like, it's constantly a puzzle.
Yeah, because you have to combine those 2 worlds. I mean, like, it's not just a straightforward punk rock band. I can see that. And of course, if you have like a certain space of sound, well, you need to have a certain space for a violin. You need to have a certain space for a trumpet. And I mean, like, although those might be temporary spaces that you have for those 2 instruments, nevertheless, somewhere something has to give. I can see that. But I mean, like, of course, at first it sounds very technical, but if you think of it as a room, I think it makes a lot of sense. Iggy, first of all, you go.
Yeah. No, please.
No, you first, because I'm just going into the next part. So you say what you first.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think this whole discussion about space, sonic space, was something that Jack really drilled into us as well before we went into the studio, which was again something that we're going to think about moving forward, and like you have a stereo field, but then you also have like a wavelength field, a hertz field, right? Like you have low frequencies, you have high frequencies, and then you have them spread around this kind of 3-dimensional 2-field space. And like there's a limit. there's only so much the ear can hear. And we've always wanted to like add little Easter eggs and things that like you might only hear on a second or third or fourth listen, or on a certain pair of headphones or a certain pair of sound system. Um, but you can't, like, I think if you want to do it properly, you have to think about these things and you have to plan, with that in mind. And there's always more. There's always better to do that. And so yeah, I don't know. I think like these days when I listen to big bands that I really like, it continuously surprises me at how clear some things are and how difficult it must have been to like make a band like Broken Social Scene where there are like four guitar players and somehow it doesn't sound like four guitar players, but they're there anyways, and in Respire, it definitely sounds like three guitar players. So yeah, I don't know. There's always like a readjustment of how we write things and how we then fully realize them into songs that is very exciting. And I find it interesting in a nerdy sort of way. Yeah.
Do you know which famous punk rock or hardcore punk rock band has three guitar players?
I don't think so, no.
Bad Religion.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah.
I don't know if they still have three, but I
Mm.
remember seeing them multiple times at the beginning of the 2010s with three guitar players. And there you don't have the difference between rhythm and lead, punk rock. But that was a huge fucking sound. That was like, whoop.
Yeah.
So again, first of all, thanks for all the insights into the new record. Everybody Here is out since the end of July, if I remember correctly. If you haven't checked it out yet, it's New Year's Eve. Put that record on, dance into the new year with it. That's my suggestion. But nobody leaves a Veil of Sound interview without having to go for the infamous quickfire round at the end. You will always get two alternatives and have to choose from them. One choice, and please maybe give a short explanation for it. You said that you lived in Japan for a while, so I'll give you two Japanese cities. Sapporo in the very north, where you probably by now have like 3 meters of snow, versus Kyoto, the old cultural center.
I would go with Kyoto for sure. I think it's like in all of Japan, it's a pretty special and unique place. I mean, it's much more historical, and very different than the sort of metropolitan, gargantuan cities, sprawling sort of urbanism. And I mean, Japan's interesting because even in the midst of all that sprawling urbanism, you still get the Shinto traditional architecture and shrines and things like that, and that mix is just beautiful and very moving. I mean, you can be in the middle of Tokyo and you'll see like a fox shrine, like a tiny little fox god shrine. It's very unique. I mean, it's not something that you see in the Western world. But then Kyoto has this added level of like the planning of it all and the space of it all, and it's very special. And there's not 3 feet of snow, which is nice.
I'll give you two Canadian bands that once even shared a split. Moneen versus Alexis on Fire.
Nice. I'm gonna go with Moneen, to be honest. I obviously it's a difficult comparison because Moneen is like, a band that had a very short amount of time putting out music and it's so good.
Yeah.
Whereas Alexis on Fire has had a very prolonged history with many turns in their sound. And of course, we are label mates and many singers. And we're label mates with Alexis on Fire. And obviously, we're very, very big fans. Their first record was pretty, the self-titled album is a pretty fundamental record for our youth, to get us more in this post-hardcore kind of screamo world before we even knew what this world or this sound was called. But yeah, I don't know. The older I get, the more I really like Moneen, and some of their hooks and their writing is just out of this world. And And yeah, I mean, I've gone to see both of them several times. But like I went to see the Get Up Kids a couple weeks ago, and the dudes from Moneen were there. Like they're that kind of band, which I really respect and like. Yeah, I'll go with Moneen.
You do know that Alexis on Fire quotes a German, or not quotes, but praises a German band that came before him, right?
No, no, what band?
Waterdown.
Okay, I don't know them, but
Check
I'm
that
gonna
one
check
out.
them out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
one word,
cool.
Waterdown. Um, Two, I think they're both even from Toronto. I'm not sure, but I know that one of them definitely lives in Toronto. Mets versus Billy Talent.
Again, the heart. Yeah. I would go
I,
Mets. Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're a little bit more of a band in our world. I think, I've seen Mets play underground shows, like, very DIY, more based shows like 10 years ago. Billy Talent's another one of those, like it's a band you cannot avoid in Canada. Like they are the 2000s ilk. They were like on every radio station and
neither in Germany, believe me, my friend. Neither in Germany. You couldn't
yeah.
miss. You couldn't
Really.
get around Billy Talent in the 2000s.
Yeah, yeah. And I do think they're very interesting. I think that first record, does have this like weird at the drive-in
Yeah,
sort of angular edge, but then that vocalist is like he's just out of this world and does something completely unique. And the fact that they were able to get so successful doing something so weird, I have tremendous, tremendous respect for, and they never really changed the weirdness.
no, no.
So I respect that tremendously. But yeah, I'll still go with Mets.
Yeah, and I still say if Ben had gone on performing on stage the way he did in the first couple of years, I mean that dude was bound to have a heart attack on stage sometime.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
when somebody told me like, yeah, how would you describe that guy to somebody who doesn't have a clue about what they're doing musically? I said the only comparison I could do was to compare Ben to one of these little green flubber worms in the Robin Williams movie. Ding 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 ding.
Yeah, good cardio.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Two other label mates of you, Sleepy Sun versus City and Color.
I actually don't know the first band or project, so this might be
Psychedelic rock.
uh, I will go with City and Color, I suppose, because I know them. Another artist that you really you could not escape City and Color in the 2010s. I mean, what a ubiquitous person and project. Yeah,
And as
wrote
I
good
like
songs.
to always like to peer into the rooms of my interview partners, I see something over your right shoulder that strikes me. So I have to give you two full of hell records: Trumpeting Ecstasy versus Weeping Choir.
Mm. It's tough, but I think trumpeting. I've definitely listened to it more. I mean, that's just a very interesting band. I think that offers so much experimentation and just they're pushing the envelope in a very singular way.
Yeah.
And again, like they're a band that I saw play a DIY space in Toronto, maybe 15 years ago, 13, like when they just had one record out, and to see their growth and their kind of steadfastness and just being fucking brutal and just alien sounding, I really respect. But I do think the songwriting on Trumpeting Ecstasy was just pretty spotless, and it's a great listen. But I also do think that like most of their records I find very enjoyable, and I'd be hard pressed to like pick one that I think is lesser than any of the other ones. I think they all really hold a space on their own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, if anybody wants to know a little bit more about Dylan and also their collaboration with Primitive Man, go check our archives. Just like you can also check our archives for an interview with Matt that we did some months ago.
Cool.
On the other side of your room, I see, of course, the poster for New Friends Fest. So I'll give you two other fests. The Fest versus Furnace Fest.
So you mean like Fest in Florida versus Furnace Fest?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've never been to either, sadly.
Me neither.
I have really good DIY friends, who come to New Friends Fest every year that love Fest
Gainesville.
in Gainesville, Florida. So personally, I find the idea of that type of festival less close to my heart. What I mean is like multiple venues, multiple shows going on at the same evening. We've had similar events in Toronto, and I don't know. I mean, again, I've never been to Gainesville, right? And from what I hear, it's very much like a unified party around the venues that are actually pretty close together, so that there are people on the streets and there are people intermingling. And I'd love to see that. And I really like to go. And Fest does have really good lineups. I mean, it's definitely traditionally maybe a little bit more pop punk oriented than what I like, but they have brought in really, really great bands and bands that, have played very rare sets. Whereas Furnace Fest, if I'm correct, is maybe a little bit more of like the singular venue sort of vibe. Not exactly too sure, but because of that, I'd probably go with Furnace. And again, amazing bands and a really well curated festival that does very different things and not just the expected. I don't know. I'd like to go to both of them.
Well, I think wasn't this edition of edition of Furnace Fest the last one? I'm not sure.
Yeah,
so.
You're right. Yes, it was. Yeah. R.I.P. then.
Yeah. Talking to somebody who is a little younger than me and who has still seen his fair share of punk rock, I'll give you two bands. One of them I was fortunate enough to see back in the day. Minor Threat versus Fugazi.
Oh, I'm gonna.
And now don't say, "Oh, you have of course seen Minor Threat." No, I didn't.
No, I'm gonna have to go with Fugazi for sure. I mean, I think as like, and both of those projects are pretty ideologically minded, and both of them were quite community oriented. But I do think that the maturity of Fugazi and the of course the band itself, the sound is fascinating.
Yeah.
And just incredibly unique and pushing itself at every record. But them as these, cultural icons and what they did with the Fugazi performances, the shows, the tours, and how they viewed their band and that they've never reunited. I think all those are really laudable, commendable things. And, I've always, as a kid in high school, I looked up to Fugazi as more than just a band that made music, and
definitely,
and really as these kinds of leaders in what a community should look like and what alternative music should be. Yeah, I wish I saw Fugazi. Yeah, very jealous.
We've mentioned Godspeed You Black Emperor now a number of times. Which part of their body of work do you like more? The first one before that hiatus, or the now second part of their existence?
It's gonna be the first part. I mean, not that like they haven't put out amazing records.
That's out of the question, yes.
Yeah, the last two in particular have been really, really strong.
Yes.
And I do think they've really come into their own in their second sort of timeline.
Yeah.
But my first tattoo is a Godspeed You Black Emperor tattoo, and I got it before they reunited, So those first few records changed my life. And they were a band that I never thought I'd get to see really when I was growing up,
Yeah.
when they got back together, I think which was the same year I might have gotten my tattoo, but or maybe the year after, but was a very
Whoa. Whoa.
like I don't know
Whoa. Whoa.
6, 7 times. So
Mhm.
and yeah, really interesting people. Like one of the times I saw them was at this old big theater in Montreal with Neurosis of all fucking bands. So they're freaks. They
Yeah.
like the weird shit. Obviously, and yeah, I'm gonna go with their first stretch of records. I think those are pretty untouchable in my opinion, and I have very very little in the way of like nitpicky criticisms about. Like I'd be hard pressed to sit down and be like, okay, write 5 criticisms of these first 4 records. Whereas
Yeah.
it might be
Difficult.
a little easier on the other later records, but again, it's just because I'm putting them up to the first ones, right? So
Two bands that sometimes are throwing in the ring with Respire share a vocalist, and they share Alex CF. So I'll give you Fall of Ifrafa versus Archivist.
mm. Yeah, well, we played with Archivist at Kiel Explode in Germany, which was amazing because I got to meet Alex, but live they were just fucking phenomenal. Um, Obviously, I've never seen Fall of Efrafa. I'm gonna have to go with Fall of Efrafa, as much as it's hard and breaks my heart, but there's just something so special,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
the later records and the experimentation of that band. I mean, yeah, what the fuck?
Yeah.
I think.
I still think that if they had pushed that one more, they could have become the second Neurosis.
Yeah, just so unique, and I think some of their songwriting when they started moving away from just the classic sort of DB crust stuff is just very interesting, really ahead of its time, and just like worth a lot. I think
Mm.
there's a lot of artistic merit, there's a lot of lyrical merit, there's a lot of political merit. They kind of tick all the boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a band that I didn't really listen to until I was, in my 20s. And then when I got into their later material, I was just flabbergasted, just blown away, and I have bugged Alex many times if a reunion might be possible. And yeah, it's a no.
Maybe in Toronto, I'll provide some space. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can tell.
Yeah. Yeah,
Last
selfish. I just
one.
want to see it, like it's for no other
Yeah, of
reason.
course, of course, of course. I can totally understand that.
Yeah.
Last one, and that is with a twinkle in the eye. The Lord of the Rings.
Hmm.
Hmm. Which part of Middle Earth do you prefer, Gondor or Rohan?
Oh, I gotta go Rohan. I mean, we got a rider in the myths in the band. Yeah, no, I'm gonna go Rohan. Yeah.
Is
Uh,
that something that you enjoy watching?
oh yeah, for sure. Every year, yes, yes. I love the books, love the movies. I was fortunate to be at a perfect age for when they were coming out in theaters. I saw the first one maybe in my first or second year of living in Canada, and then each subsequent one in theaters as well. And yeah, I watched them pretty much every year around this time. Hard to avoid. And those movies are just like
Yeah.
there's. I hope nobody ever touches them again because there's what are you going to do better? Like what are you going to improve on those 3 movies? I mean, he really did the thing. So Yeah, I'm sure they'll find a way to do it again.
Yeah, I'm sure Amazon will find a way to fuck it up at one point. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
I'm sure.
Exactly. Exactly.
Igin, thanks for all the detailed answers. Thanks for your time. In
Thank you.
Toronto, it's like 12:30 right now. Over here, it's 6:30. Uh, and as we're still in the Yuletide season, last question, but I asked everybody, nearly everybody on this marathon by now. Favorite Christmas track?
Oh man, fuck. I don't know. You know, I used to really like Wham's Last Christmas, but I feel like in the last couple years, I know. I love the '80s, you know, and I love '80s pop
I
music.
was
So
there in the 80s, and believe me,
I know,
that was shitty stuff.
I know, and I bet I like that's doesn't surprise me. I don't fucking know. I don't really love Christmas music in general. Like it's just there, you know. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one for me. I'm not as festive
No, no,
as
no,
I
no.
could be.
That's totally fine. I think that a lot of us forget that there is also some kind of good festive music. If anybody wants to go into the new year with some Yule-type music that I enjoy, listen to Smith and Burroughs,
Okay.
and to the record "When the Angels Sing." On there, you will find my favorite Christmas track of all times, and that is "When the Thames Froze." Because it's also left-wing anarcho politics, so like right on my head.
Cool.
Again, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for talking.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.